Hi everyone, my name is Susie and I'm a third year maths student at the University of Warwick. This video should hopefully be familiar to all of you because it is the part 2 to the video that I released last month, which was basically just going over what my life was like as a first year student, a maths student in particular, you know, like what my timetable was like, how many contact hours I had, kind of giving a review of the modules that I was taking. But when I was originally filming the video, it just ended up being way too long, so I've split it into 2 parts. If you want to look at the last part, I went over just kind of an introduction to how the system works, and also what my term 1 was like, and this video is going to be my term 2, term 3, and just kind of an overview at the end. So without any further ado, let's get into the modules that I was taking in term 2 of my first year at Warwick. So here's what was going on in my second term in first year. You can probably immediately see already that I've got quite a lot more going on than term 1. I ended up taking 7 modules this term, which had 12 hours of contact hours for those modules. To be clear, so one of these, Introduction to Particle Physics, that was only running from week 5 to week 10, or week 6 to week 10, so it wasn't actually running in the first half of term. It was only worth 6 cats. So for half of the term I had, 1 less hour a week. But still quite a lot more than first term. So of these, analysis, geometry in motion, mathematics by computer, and linear algebra were all of the core modules. So you can see again we had those 4 core modules in a term, and then programming for scientists, introduction to particle physics, and discrete mathematics and its applications too, catchy, were the optional modules that I took. So you might have noticed that the reason I guess that my term 2 was so much heavier than my first term is because basically all of my optional modules ended up being in term 2. At the time that made sense because I didn't really like any of the optional modules that were in term 1, so it made more sense for me to take these modules that were in term 2. But looking back on it, I really regret it because it did make my life a lot more difficult having, this many more modules in term 2. I think really prioritising having that balance is something that's very, very smart to do, because my life in term 2 was so busy. You can again see that I had lots of 10 AMs and then a 9 AM from discrete maths in term 2, so I was lying earlier I guess when I said that first years didn't have 9 AMs, but only 1 9 AM a week, and it was again online, so I watched that from bed most weeks, I believe. Again, the tutorial meetings, I did also have a supervision meeting, but something that might be, I guess, foreign to people who have come from a sixth form background is that I remember in sixth form we always had Wednesday afternoons off, and we were told that, that's what happened at university. That's not what happens at university. Since this term, I think normally I do end up having Wednesday afternoons off, but it seems to be so timetable specific. I mean, yeah, you can see right here I had a discrete maths lecture in the afternoon on a Wednesday. And you can also see that, 4 o'clock isn't even the latest lecture that I've had, but you can see that these things can be spread across the entire day. So whilst it might seem like only having, again, the maximum I ever had was 3 hours of lectures in a day, it might seem like that's not much, but they can be spread across the whole day. So not so much an issue when everything's online, but when things are in person, then, you might have to end up spending a very, very long time on campus. So, onto a very brief review of the modules I took in term 2. I'm not going to review analysis, because if you hadn't caught that, the analysis that I took in term 1 and term 2 were the same. So, yep, that was basically just building off of the same things that we were learning in term 1. That was much the same as it was in term 1 and term 2. Other core modules, geometry in motion wasn't really my favourite, but that was more the content than any of the teaching. I'm not a very geometrically minded person, so I struggled with some of the more geometry-based things, but weirdly enough, towards the end of the term, I really enjoyed the content. Normally, you start with the easy stuff in a module, and then by the end, you're doing like the most difficult stuff. But geometry and motion, it was like for most of the module, I was like, oh, I'm really not enjoying this. And the last couple of weeks when it was the most difficult stuff, something just clicked, and I really enjoyed that specific part. So take of that what you will, I guess. Another one of the core modules was Mathematics by Computer, which was the Python module, and that was definitely one of my favourite modules for the entirety of first year. It was taught in such a useful way. I don't know how to say it other than that. It was taught basically using Jupyter notebooks, so there would be lots of example code, and then there would be tasks within the notebook where I was like, modify this code, or write your own code based on what you've seen, or perform this task, or blah blah blah. But it was so nice. I think it really walks you through every step of the process, and also it was just so useful to have because I still use Python in third year, so having that knowledge in Python straight from the beginning of my time at university is so useful. And also it was just really fun. I really enjoyed it because there were some really interesting Python libraries that I haven't worked with before. So you get all sorts done, like all sorts of data analysis and machine learning and graph drawing. It's great stuff. I really enjoyed it. And the final core module was linear algebra. Probably one of my favourite lecturers for the year. I think it was another one similar to abstract algebra where there were a lot of definitions, so some people didn't enjoy that part so much. But I really enjoyed it personally. I really enjoyed maths with matrices, and that's what linear algebra is, so I was having an excellent time. And it was one which was great for examples. I think linear algebra is one of the fields of maths where it's a lot easier to understand when you see what's actually being done, so there were lots of good examples that were provided that were really useful to me. Not necessarily a fault of the module itself, but I guess just something to look out for is that it is one of those fields, however, which if you make a mistake on the first line, that mistake gets carried through all the way to the end and can completely just scupper your answer sometimes, because a lot of the things, like, you're doing matrix multiplication, you're doing row reduction, you're doing upper echelon form of matrix or whatever, so lots of very simple additions, multiplications, subtractions, but as I said, if you make that mistake early on, it's brutal, so you have to be really careful not to make mistakes. So just a word of warning, I guess, to if you're the kind of person who makes mistakes, practice at that, as I had to practice quite a lot to stop losing errors on really stupid mistakes. So yeah. So then, for my optional modules, Introduction to Particle Physics, the one that was only 5 weeks, I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed it as it felt like a very specialised form of physics. It felt like we were exploring like a very niche field, and I really enjoyed that. I thought it was very well taught. I had no issues with that. Really engaging content, but one of the problems that I did have is that it felt like as a non-physics student there wasn't that much support. It felt like there was a lot of stuff which was assumed knowledge, which I didn't know, so I really had to go away and do my own reading. If I hadn't done A-level physics, I would have been completely... I would not have survived at all. But yeah, that's just something which I guess it had been... I wish it had been made clearer that I needed that knowledge, because then I could have gone away and done that reading before I needed it. Another optional one was Discrete Maths 2. This was a module where, the lecture notes were really good, the content was really, really great, like I really enjoyed the content, but it was quite complicated content, and the way that it was explained was sometimes quite confusing. The exam ended up being really difficult, even for people who I know who are like absolute mega geniuses at that kind of thing, and they ended up really struggling on the exam. So it did end up being curved quite nicely, so I didn't do as badly as I was expecting, but it was still I don't know, it was a module which made me think, which I really didn't like, graph theory. But then, since then, I've been taught graph theory in a different way, and I found out that I love graph theory. I just didn't love the way that it was taught to me in this module. So, something I guess to kind of keep in mind. Yeah, it was a really fun module for content, not necessarily for the exam itself. And finally, for optional modules, was Programming for Scientists, which was a Java-based module. I'd never learnt Java before, so it was very, very new to me. And I wasn't that impressed with the lecturer, in all honesty. It felt very much like he just let us kind of go off and do our own thing, and the lectures that were given were lots of stuff about, you know, like the fundamentals of programming in Java, like teaching you about different concepts and constructs and things that you would use and skills, but not necessarily directly linked to the code that you were actually doing. And that when you had questions about, you know, my code isn't working, what can I do? He'd very much kind of be like, you need to figure it out on your own. That's not to say I didn't enjoy the module. I really enjoyed the module, and I'm really glad I took it, because I really enjoy Java as a language. And the lecture notes were very good, and the exam, or like the coursework that we were doing, I thought they were all really useful tasks, like in terms of understanding programming. I feel like sometimes you can be asked, when you're doing programming coursework, it feels like you can be asked quite like meaningless program, like, oh, just make code that does this, whatever. But I really did enjoy the assignments, so I enjoyed the module. I just didn't enjoy the level of support we were getting from the lecturer. I guess it was quite difficult because it was an online one, but it is what it is. So finally we arrive at term 3 for year 3. You can see that the only real module that I actually had this term was quantum phenomena, but also the other modules would have like revision sessions and support classes and stuff like that going on, which was quite nice to, you know, have that face to face and be able to ask questions before the exams were actually happening. So term 3 was quite light in terms of lectures, mostly because it was all just independent study preparing for exams. But quantum phenomena itself, the 10 AM on a Monday, I really enjoyed that. I felt like the lecturer wasn't the most engaging at times, but he did like clearly care for what he was teaching us, and I really enjoyed most of what was being taught. It got a bit further into the specifics than I was expecting. It ended up being like a lot more involved than I was expecting, which I actually enjoyed. I wasn't anticipating it to be quite so heavy, but it was, and it turns out I loved it. But it was a very similar feeling to particle physics, where I felt like, as a non-physics student, I felt like there was just something that I hadn't been taught that I should have been taught before I was taking this module, but I got through it, and I really enjoyed it. So yeah, term 3. So I hope that was useful for you, mostly just in terms of seeing how much students actually have to do. Alongside this, you know, I was getting probably like on average for term 1 and 2, probably like about 2 assignments a week or something, so I was also having to do those assignments. Sometimes the modules would have extra recorded content which I'd have to watch, normally about an hour per module that I have to watch per week. Some of them more or less. It seems like the more lectures a module has, the fewer hours of recorded content they have to provide, which, you know, makes sense. Most of them have a similar number of hours they need to get through. It's just whether those are live or not. All in all, I know that I've been, I guess, somewhat negative for some of these modules. Please don't let my experience put you off, because this was 2 years ago. But at the same time, I guess it's just something to keep in mind, where if you have really specific priorities and I've said something which makes you think, oh, that is absolutely not the module for me, trust yourself, listen to yourself, you know, you can all take that on your own heads, those decisions. So I hope this has just been useful. Please let me know if you have any other questions, and I will see you all in the next video.